Hey everyone, welcome to the fifth and final part of Project 4. In this part of the project, I'm going to show you how I made the component that causes the sphere in the back of the gallery to expand when you click on it. And that same component also causes the gallery, the walls and the ceiling and the floor, to disappear so that the photosphere is in full view. Now, you might have seen that this component already works. It's already in the starter project. So what I'm going to be doing is basically talking you through how I created it and kind of how the pieces fit together. And then for the challenge, you'll be reusing a lot of these skills to add more photospheres to your gallery. Okay, so to kick it off, just a quick bit of review, some of the JavaScript concepts and functions that we learned in the previous part. So we learned about the keyword this. It's a special word that lets you reference whatever HTML entity your component is attached to. So in your HTML, if you had, as we have here, the disappear component on this floor, then in this case, this refers to the floor. But when you have it on other elements, then this will just refer to whatever element it's on. Okay. We also went over set attribute. This is a very important function, lets you create or modify the attributes on your HTML elements. So we saw in our disappear component, we actually used it to make entities disappear by modifying their visible attribute. And visible is an A-frame component. So all we did was set the visible attribute to false. And then finally, we learned about add event listener. And this is how you make things respond to things like clicks or hovers. And when you add an event listener like this in the way that we did, you first select the event that you're listening for, in this case, click. And then in the second part, in parentheses, you can put the name of the function that you'd like to run or call as soon as that click event is detected. Okay, now we're going to reuse a lot of those skills and concepts for this photosphere gallery when we're putting that into practice. So I actually removed disappear from my code because I don't need it anymore, but we will be reusing some concepts from that component. Okay, so first off, we want to talk about ID and class in HTML. And if you look at the HTML file, you'll notice that some of the entities have an ID attribute, like sky has an ID of sky, and this parent entity has an ID of architecture. And then also some of them have a class attribute that we haven't gone over yet. We're going to go over now. So this has a class of home world, and other ones have a class of home world as well. So what's going on with ID and class? Now, we saw with that keyword this, that this will let you, reference whatever HTML entity a component is attached to. But sometimes you don't want to do that. Sometimes you want to have a component that's able to reference some other entity in your scene. Like if you want to make a button that when you click on it, something else scales up, this isn't going to cut it, right? We need a way to reference other entities in the scene. And you can do that with both ID and class. Now, what's the difference between ID and class? So ID is unique. You can't have two elements with the same ID. And in fact, if you try to do that, then glitch will even let you know that there's a problem, right? So I'm going to give this ID equals sky. And you'll see glitch throws up the little red dot letting you know that something is not right, right? So ID is unique. You can't have two elements with the same unique ID. Class, though, is different. Multiple elements can belong to the same class, and that's why we do see multiple elements with class equals home world. And when we, in our JavaScript files, we can reference elements by their ID or their class, okay? But that's the key difference, is ID has to be unique, but multiple elements can be in the same class. Okay. Now, in our component, how do we actually use ID and class to reference our elements? Well, let's dive into it. So I'm looking at the first two lines here of the inside of the init function. So this is, again, code that will run as soon as this component loads up on an entity, if it's attached to an entity in your scene. And first we've got let. It's just like we're kind of defining a variable almost, right? It's like let, and then I've given it a name of home world elements. I'm trying to gather all of those elements that have that class home world. Okay. I'm saying let home world elements equals, and then we've got this bit of code, right? Now, document just actually refers to the index.html document. Okay. So you can do document dot, and then the key new thing here is query selector all. And be wary, this is case sensitive, so keep that in mind. And then after query selector all, in parentheses inside of quotes, you can just put a dot and then the name of the class that you are referencing. So what this does is it actually searches the document, it queries the document, and selects all of the elements that have this class of home world. And it stores them all as a list inside of this variable, which you can then we'll use later to manipulate them, right? We actually want to make all of these things invisible, because when in our scene here, when we click on the sphere, right, notice one of the things that happens is all of the stuff with the class of home world, it disappears. So that's why we want to make a reference to it. Okay, so that is query selector all, and the other one is very similar. In this case, we don't need to find all of the elements that have a certain class. We only need to find the one element that has the ID sky. So if you're looking for just a particular element, you can just use its unique ID, and instead of using query selector all, just use query selector, and instead of a dot when you're trying to find a class, you can use the hash sign followed by its unique ID. So hash sky. So we've made two variables here. One of them stores a list of all of the elements with our class home world, and the other one just has a reference to our one element that has this ID in it. Okay. Okay, so that is why, that's why I had ID in class in my HTML to begin with, right? It's because I knew that down the line in my JavaScript, I'd want a way to be able to reference those elements so that I could modify and manipulate them in my JavaScript components. Okay, cool stuff. So that is query selector all and query selector. Okay, and if you want to actually test that you've, done this correctly, you could actually log them to the console. So I'm going to log my home world elements variable, and I'm going to log my new sky variable, and let's see what appears, right? So here we see it, right, in the console. It actually shows us right on our file on line 7, which is where that log is. It gives us a list, and these are all of the entities that have the class home world. Okay, so we logged that list, and then we also logged our sky. Right, here's our sky element. Okay, so our variables work. We've done this correctly. Good stuff. I'm going to remove these console logs. Okay, moving on, and taking a step back for a second. I don't expect you to actually memorize the exact syntax and spelling of these things. These are things that you're going to see a lot, and over time you'll get more familiar with them, and you'll be able to just code it right away. But what I want to emphasize to you here is that you're kind of learning what is possible, and down the line you might have a use case for query selector all if you're trying to reference multiple elements at once. And even if you don't remember, the exact syntax of how it works, you'll know enough to be able to just open up Google and search for query selector class, and you'll get the help you need, right? I use Google all the time. Often it's stuff that I learned in some tutorial a few months ago. I don't exactly remember, but I remember enough to be able to search out how to do it, right? And then after enough times of searching it out and doing it on my own, I will learn it kind of fully. But don't be afraid or ashamed to use Google, right? Every developer searches for stuff. All right, good stuff. So now we've got references to our elements that we're going to use in our component. All right. On the one hand, we're going to change the sky to make it the new photosphere that we select, and we're going to make these home world elements disappear. So now it's time to write our function. Okay. And if you remember the basic function syntax, right? It's like this. We say first give the function a name, then you've got parentheses, or sorry, new function equals, and then parentheses, and the equals arrow sign, and then in between the curly braces, you've got the code that you want to execute when your function is called. So that's what I've got going on here, right, with sphere loader. I'm naming the function sphere loader. I've got an equals. I don't have anything in these parentheses yet, and that's okay. We'll get to that later. And then the code that I first want to execute is actually the code that will change the photosphere that is the background of the scene. Okay, so right now I've got this like night sky, right, which is the photosphere that I have set as the source for sky right here. This is referencing one of the assets I've uploaded into the asset management system here. Right here it is, star sky. So the source is a URL. And so to change that, what I want to do is actually change the source for the photosphere. And we know how to do that from before. We can use our .set attribute. Now the attribute that we're setting the value for is source, right? So remember you got two things in parentheses here. The first is the name of the attribute that you want to set or modify. And then the second value is what you want to set it to. Okay, and in this case, what I want to set it to is not the star sky asset, but it's actually this other photosphere that I've also uploaded to the asset management system that has an ID of Bordeaux Theater. Okay, so I'm doing sky, which again, sky is I use query selector to find the sky element, and then I can do sky dot set attribute. The attribute I'm setting is the source, and I'm setting it to Bordeaux Theater. Okay. Now, if we didn't have the bottom part of this sorted out, right, let's just test out that we've done this right. Okay, I'm going to click this, and there you have it, right? The photosphere in the back did change. We don't have a great view of it because we haven't made the other things disappear, but we can see that this is working, right? We have changed the source of our sky element using a set attribute. Okay, good stuff. Now, this is going to get a little hairy because we're new to JavaScript, but this is one of those things that, again, I don't expect you to memorize the syntax for this. I just expect you to understand how it is that, that this is working at a kind of general level. And then as you learn more, the pieces will all kind of come together and it'll all make more sense. But for now, right, let's dive in. So, what we want to do is change the visibility, right, of our home world elements, right? All the elements that have a class of home world that I know are the ones that I want to disappear as soon as this is loaded. Okay. So we made a reference to that up here with our query selector all. But we can't just do a simple set attribute on the whole list of elements. And the reason for that is you can only do a set attribute on a particular element. You can't do a set attribute on a list of elements. You have to kind of access each element individually to do that set attribute. So there's a handy bit of JavaScript that lets you kind of loop through a list of elements and then run a bit of code on each one individually. And once we do that, we can indeed do set attribute. Okay. So the way this works is you put I'm putting our list, home world elements, and then I'm saying dot for each, basically saying for each one of these, and then in the parentheses, you put a function, and this function will run for each element on that list. Okay. And now for this function, you'll see that we actually do have a value in the opening parentheses, right? We've seen before, like in in this function, there is no value there. But in this one, we actually do want to define a value because we're basically giving a name for each individual element on the list, so that our function then has something to work with. And I might not be explaining this the best way, but basically what this code is saying, is for each of the elements on this list of home world elements, let's call each one home world element, and then as this code loops through for each one, what it's doing is running this code on each element in the list, and it's saying home world element dot set attribute. We've actually seen this before with our disappear component. We're just doing a set attribute and setting the visible attribute to false. And visible, as you might remember, is an A-frame component. Components, of course, you set on your entities with attributes. So we can use set attribute to modify and use that visible component. In this case, we're setting its value to false to make it disappear. So all in all, this code is saying, look, for each of the elements on this list that you've gathered with query selector all of those elements with that home world class, let's call each one home world element, and then for each one, go ahead and do a set attribute visible false. And that all in all of that together is our sphere loader function. Right, it wraps it up with the curly braces that actually closes it off. So when the sphere loader function is called, these three lines of code will execute. Okay. So it's doing a lot. This function, it's doing both the sky, changing the source of the sky, and it's changing the visibility of the home world elements. Some people like to really break up their functions so that each one has its own kind of purpose, but I've kind of lumped them together here in this function. Now the function won't actually execute until it's called, right? We've only defined the function here. Next we need to actually call it, and we're going to use a similar thing as before, right? We want this function to be called. We want that code to execute when the user clicks on this sphere entity in the scene, right? So for that, we want to have we have to set up, as we did before, an event listener to listen for that click. And then on that click, you simply can put the name of the function that you'd like to execute as the second value in the parentheses of your add event listener. So we have a this because we're going to put this component, the sphere expand component, we're actually going to put it on the sphere. So this will refer to the sphere itself. We're going to say this dot L, referencing that's element. We're going to add an event listener. We're listening for that click. And when that click goes off, we'd like to run or call our sphere loader function. Okay, I know that was a bit of a mouthful, but as you can see, right, when we move up to this and click on it, it executes our function, right? The source of the sky changes, and all of our home world elements disappear because of our for each. That's looping through each of the elements on that list and running this code for each one. Okay, there you have it. What I'd like you to try to do for the challenge is actually go ahead and look in the starter project at the back home component, which I have is actually right kind of below you in the scene. Hold on, let me refresh this. Not sure where it went. Yeah, it's usually just right below you in the scene. And see how I put that together. And taking a step back, notice that for this sphere expand component to work, of course, you need to import your JavaScript file into your HTML. And then you have to make sure that the component itself is actually on one of your entities. In this case, I put the component right on the sphere. Right? That's why when you click on the sphere, the function goes off. The back home function is on this circle. It's the last entity. It's got an ID of home button. So go ahead and look at the back home component and just see if you can make sense of it, right? You should be able to kind of understand how I have set this up. And what I'd like you to do after you check out back home is try to add some other spheres into your gallery so that when you click on them, that particular sphere will expand and cause the rest of the gallery to disappear, just as happens with this one. So go ahead and add some more photospheres to your gallery. When all is said and done, if you'd like to share your project to the Frame Academy gallery, I put a link right here, a little form where you can just submit it. If you have any questions, check out our online community with this link here. This is a quick link to the online community. And if you'd like to support the creation of more Frame Academy projects, check out the purple banner at the bottom of the page. There's a little button where you can do that. Okay, thank you very much. I know that JavaScript can be tough to tackle. Again, I do encourage you to kind of be looking through other JavaScript tutorials as you're going through this stuff. I'm going to be specifically looking at how to apply, JavaScript skills to this WebXR stuff, but it's good just to look at kind of general JavaScript tutorials as well. Okay, good luck, and let me know if you are able to make it through this stuff. And let me know, of course, if you have ideas for how I can improve these tutorials. All right, thank you very much.